Welcome everybody, I am Mrs. Rafferty. Today we are going to be talking about main idea and key details. We're going to be using the story from Unit 5, Week 2, The Grand Old Tree. So I'm going to share my screen now so that we can read the story. And you are going to need paper and crayons or markers to complete this activity. So I'm going to let you pause the video now so you can go get some paper, some markers or crayons to complete the activity at the end. And we're going to be discussing our main idea and key details. So here we have the story, A Grand Old Tree by Mary Newell de Palma. So we know that A Grand Old Tree is the title of our story. It's on the front cover. It's in big, bold letters. The author is by Mary Newell de Palma. We know the author is the person who wrote the words. Now we can assume by this that she is also the illustrator because there's no illustrator here. So she is both the author and the illustrator. So she wrote the words and she drew the pictures. Here's our table of contents page. We have A Grand Old Tree, which begins on page 4. It is an informational text, so it's teaching us something about science by Mary Newell de Palma. We have a paired reader for this as well, From a Seed to a Tree, that begins on page 33. It is also an informational text about science. Here we have a dedication page. It says, for Pat, Bridget, John, Tom, Mike, and Jean love Mary. So we're not sure who those people are, but she's dedicating this story to them. Once there was a grand old tree. So we can take the assumption here that our main idea of this story is going to be the grand old tree. Her roots sank deep into the earth. Her arms reached high into the sky. So I want you to remember that the roots are like our legs. They go down into the earth and we use them to walk, just like a tree uses its roots to base itself. Its arms are its branches. They lean out high, they help it move and sway, it grows the leaves. She was home to many creatures. Birds nested among her branches. Squirrels scurried through her leaves. Caterpillars and ladybugs crawled about. The grand old tree flowered. So that means it grew many flowers, and you can see that there's squirrels and bees and birds in this story. It bore fruit. So bore is just a fancy word for saying that it made its own fruit. So it looks like here it made some kind of berry. And sowed seeds. So sowed is another word for saying that it grew seeds, and those seeds fluttered off the tree. She had many children. So those seeds would fly off of the tree and land in the ground, and the ground would do its work, and it would begin to sprout. So here we have the little sproutlings. They changed the landscape for miles around, perhaps even farther than the old tree knew. So that means that those seeds that she sowed, that she grew and that flew away, landed on the ground many places and started to grow new trees. The grand old tree lived a long, long time. She basked in the sun, bathed in the rain, swayed in the breeze, and danced in the wind. She grew and she shed many millions of leaves. At last, the grand old tree was very, very old. Her branches no longer swayed and danced, but cracked and snapped in the wind. Finally, she fell, and snow gently covered her. The old tree died. She no longer flowered, bore fruit, or sowed seeds. But she was still home to many creatures. Raccoons nested in her trunk. Centipedes crawled along her branches, and lichen grew on her bark. The grand old tree slowly crumbled. She became part of the earth. Today, the roots of her grandchildren sink deep into this earth. The arms reach high into the sky. So we know that the roots are like her legs, and the grandchildren are the times that all those seeds that flew in the wind, landed and sprouted a new tree. Her arms reach high into the sky, and we can remember that her arms are her branches. They are home to many creatures, just like the grand old tree. So I'm going to stop presenting and I'm going to change my camera, and I need you to make sure that you have that paper and those crayons ready, because we are going to draw the grand old tree and we're going to draw some details in the story. Okay, so here's our piece of paper and I have my markers. So the first thing we're going to do is, we know that the main idea in this story is that grand old tree. So of course, the first thing we're going to do is draw that tree. So we're going to draw her base, her trunk. We're going to draw lots and lots and lots and lots of branches and things around her. I'm going to have some branches come out. First, I got to draw the grass. And then I'm going to draw her branches that came out, just like this. We're going to put some leaves on these branches, because we know that one of the details in the story was that she growed these leaves on the tree. So here are the leaves. And if you remember from the story, it talked about how her branches, she didn't call them her branches, they called her arms. So I'm going to draw a little line and an arrow, and I'm going to write her arms. Now, it also talked about the roots, and we know the roots grow deep down into the ground. So I'm going to move my camera up a little bit so you can see this. I'm going to draw her roots down at the bottom, some squiggly lines. There are her roots, and of course I'm going to label her roots, because that was a detail in our story, that she had her arms, which were the branches. She had her roots. Now, another important thing in this story was that they talked about sowing seeds, about her children and her grandchildren. And sometimes we see those seeds in the air, that we play with them. We call them helicopters. We can throw them and they can spin around. So I'm going to pretend that these are all of those seeds, or her children, that are landing on the ground. I'll draw some over here too. And of course, we will label them as seeds. That is another detail in our story, that she had roots and seeds and arms. Now, she also had those berries in her story because she grew some fruit. So we're going to draw those berries. And I'm going to draw a little stem on those berries. We're just going to label these fruit, because we know she bore fruit. She made fruit. So right now we have 4 details from our story. It talked about our grand old tree. It talked about the roots, the seeds, the fruit, and the arms. It also talked about the animals that lived in her tree. So we know that birds live in her tree. So we're going to draw some birds. I'm going to put the birds on the branches that they were laying. I'm going to write my word birds up here, because that was another detail in our story. She also had some caterpillars in her tree. So I'm going to draw some caterpillars and going up her bark like this. And caterpillars is a very long word. So after I write it, if you want to pause the video to copy it, you can. There are her caterpillars. Now, the one other thing that it talked about in the story was that her children started to sprout. So we know that her children were these seeds. And down at the bottom in the grass here, I'm going to draw little stems and the little leaves that start to grow, because those are her trees. And remember, they always have roots. You got to draw some down into the ground. So we'll draw some over here too, maybe one here, one here. because these are her children that are starting to sprout. We'll draw 2 little leaves on them, showing her children or her sproutlings. And since they called them her children in the story, I'm going to call them her children here. And these are details from our stories. Different parts of our story that are very specific to how the tree lived. So once we talk about it again, we have our main topic, which is our grand old tree. We have the roots of the grand old tree that go deep down into the ground. We have her arms, which we know are branches. We have some birds that live in her tree. We have the fruit that she bore, the seeds that she sowed, the caterpillars that also lived in the tree, and we also have the seeds that flew in the breeze and became her children, or the little sproutlings down here. And that is how we talk about main idea and key details. And if you want to label it on your paper as well, the main idea and key details, we can put it over here. You can pause the video to write main idea, and it's okay if you go over it a little bit, and details. There's our story. So if you have any questions, please let us know. Leave a comment. But it was great talking to you today about main idea and details.